Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nik Nanos.
Nik, we've got your monthly seat projections, but I want to set the stage first. Let's get into how much popular support the major parties have right now.
Well, what's interesting, Michael, we always talk about the gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals, the gap between the Liberals and the New Democrats. Latest Nanos tracking wanted to show you popular support today compared to the 2021 election. So right now, the Conservatives at 40%, they're doing 6 points better than during the last federal election. Liberals, 15, Michael, 15 points back at 25. Wow. They're down 8 points from the last election. NDP at 21, up 3. So 15 points between the Conservatives and the Liberals. That's a pretty significant gap. And you know what? Not much of a gap, only 4 percentage points between the Liberals and the Conservatives. The Liberals have to be worried about that. NDP probably happy with that. Bloc at 7, Green Party at 5. Green's up 3 points. People's Party down 4 points. So, you know, and they're at 1% in the Nanos tracking. So the interesting thing about the PPC, there's probably 3 percentage points that went from the purple column, I guess purple PPC, to the conservative column, and that probably explains at least part of the advantage that the Poilievre Conservatives are enjoying right now.
Wow. So the Liberals have a big budget on the horizon. They've been down in the polls for a while now, Nik, and the Conservative lead seems to have strengthened. What do you expect from the finance minister in that document?
Well, you know, the thing is that budgets are always a time they're usually infomercials for the government of the day, right? That's basically what the Liberals will try to do. But the added context is that at the latest, the election will be in 2025. Perhaps it might be earlier. No one really knows what will happen with the NDP-Liberal arrangement in the House of Commons. You know, the big question is are the Liberals going to spend money and make this kind of an election goodie budget? Or are they going to show restraint? You know, average Canadians are worried about spending and worried about paying for the bills. So I'm not sure how well an election goodie budget would appear to many Canadians, because it might just show that the Liberals not only are out of touch with average Canadians, but are just basically spending money in order to try to hold on to power. So a bit of a tough spot for the Liberals. Be interesting to see who wins the battle. It'll be like thumb wrestling in cabinet, maybe. I don't know if there's such a thing for the budget, but I expect a lot of that going on to determine the direction that the Trudeau Liberals want to go on when it comes to the finances and the budget and the state of the nation on that front.
Well, as you said, cost of living crisis, things like food inflation will play a role in the budget likely. And there are also major talking points for Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. An interesting thing happened recently, connecting a top Poilievre advisor with Loblaws. Listen to this.
Conservatives, as you've seen, are slowing down the reform that we're proposing. That should come as no big surprise to all of you, as we've recently learned that one of the top advisor to the opposition leader has been more busy to lobby for the industry than to fight for consumers.
Pierre Poilievre has been standing up for months now, pretending that he cares about high grocery prices faced by Canadians. And it turns out that his top advisor is working as a lobbyist for Loblaws. I think Mr. Poilievre owes some explanations to Canadians.
Nik, just to provide some background here, Jenny Byrne and Associates does have some on its staff linked to Loblaws in Ontario. Not Jenny Byrne herself. They say it's limited to cutting red tape in beer and wine sales. But the optics are a little strange here, and it's clearly, you know, something that the Liberals are trying to use to push back on Poilievre's attacks. What do you make of all this?
It's a drive-by smear, Michael, a drive-by smear by the Liberals, kind of stretching the truth a little bit because, you know, according to the registration, that Conservative advisor was actually not registered as a lobbyist. Just happens that 6 of her colleagues in the shop that she owns were working on the file, and I'm sure that the Liberals are just trying to basically smear this advisor. and to try to make this a little bit of a story. And, you know, that one of the reasons why is because, go figure, you know, in a survey that we did with Bloomberg News just a couple months ago, when we asked people who was responsible for, you know, the rising cost of groceries, at the very top of the list was grocery stores at 28%. And second, actually of note, was rising cost of fuel at 18%. So that's kind of, you know, so the top, so I'm sure the Liberals are trying to connect, you know, lobbying activity for the grocery stores to that top Poilievre advisor. At the same time, you know, Canadians know that, you know, with the carbon tax, that's added fuel costs and transportation costs. That contributes to the rising cost of groceries. But drive-by smear, I think drive-by smear, I think that's basically what it's about. And you know what? If you're 15 points back, it's kind of like the drowning person trying to grab a rope. I think the Liberals are just trying to grab something and hope that it sticks to Pierre Poilievre and his team.
Well, Nik, I mean, they're pretty far down, but how does that translate into seats? You've got your monthly seat projection, and I'd love to kind of go east-west and start on the East Coast this time. Why don't we start there?
Sure. And you know what? The picture really says it all. You'll see on one side, on the left-hand side, you'll see the vote projections or the seat projections, color-coded. On the right-hand side, the last federal election. And the other thing to note, that if it's something is a particular color, a party color like blue or red, that's, you know, Conservative or Liberal or New Democrat, orange. If it's black, that means it's a 2% margin. If it's gray, it's a 7% margin. Those are too close to call. So check out Atlantic Canada. Wow, last time, pretty red, right across the board in the Maritimes. You can see basically noticeable pickups for the Conservatives. Actually, one thing that I'd like to point out that's quite striking is Shediac. That's that riding on the coast in New Brunswick. That's the riding of Dominic LeBlanc, very longtime politician. His father was also the member of parliament there. We're now putting Shediac in the too close to call. We have Dominic LeBlanc ahead, but he's leading by less than 7 percentage points in the Nanos modeling. And can I tell you something? If there's such a thing as a canary in the coal mine, it's Dominic LeBlanc, because he has a solid track record. And you know what? If he has to kind of look over his shoulder and focus on making sure that he fights in Shediac, that's not good news for the Liberals in the region. And you can see the setback on that front.
I think it's safe to say that's one of the major strongholds, I suppose, in the country.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, he's a senior cabinet minister. He's a very trusted advisor to the prime minister, and his counsel is sought after. So be interesting to see what happens. Now, we still project that he would win the riding, but it's just not as close as it has been in the past. Michael, is probably the best way to describe it.
What about in Quebec?
You know, when we look at the island of Montreal, still pretty red. So, and Quebec is the best region for the Liberals, but you can see the little spot of orange for the New Democrats, and you can see beside that a riding that's too close to call. It's a toss-up in the Nanos seat projections. That could be a second pickup for the NDP. Also off island, Longueuil, you can see the bloc. In a bit of a closer fight than usual on that front. But not a lot of change in the island of Montreal. Maybe we'll see the Liberals pick up, or the NDP pick up a seat from the Liberals, and the Bloc having to fend off a little bit of an attack.
Now, we've seen some pretty strong Conservative numbers in the GTA in Ontario. How is it looking now?
Wow, it is just so striking. Let's look at Ottawa first. And, you know, last election, basically solid red when we're talking about the city, and then solid blue when you get out of the city. But right now, in our seat projections, Ottawa Centre, which is it's a Liberal riding, right now it's a toss-up between the Liberals and the New Democrats. And then what we see are the Tories challenging a little more in the burbs and Nepean and in that particular area where they're challenging the Liberals. So there are a couple of ridings that could flip in Ottawa, and that are a little closer than the Liberals have seen in the past.
I apologize to Ottawa for almost skipping it. Now, what about further west to my hometown in the GTA.
Toronto? Yes. Holy moly guacamole. Check out this. Like if a map kind of tells you a story, you can see that, you know, Toronto, not just in the last election, but usually is a bit of a lock, you know, especially the city for the Liberals. And, you know, when the Liberals have been able to do well, they've been very competitive and have been able to pick up seats in the suburban areas, the Mississaugas, the Bramptons, right? Those types of ridings. But check it out now. You can see, even in the city of Toronto, which is basically, why don't we just call it ground zero for the Liberal Party of Canada, that they're going to be fighting in a number of ridings. In the city of Toronto, they'll be fighting directly with the New Democrats, who will probably want to try to pick up some seats. And when you get outside of Toronto, you can see that some of those other ridings in the Mississaugas and Bramptons, it's going to be the Conservatives that are going to be some of the key challengers. And, you know, Toronto, not to diminish the whole country, but Toronto will make or break the Liberals. If they see a setback in Toronto, that's when kind of like the emergency is, if there's such a thing as an emergency button for the Liberals, that's when it's going to be pressed, because, you know, the Liberals are still doing well in Montreal, but it looks like they're going to be in a tough fight in the next election in Toronto, in the city of Toronto, and also outside in the Greater Toronto region.
So, and a lot of that, Nick, is we're seeing strong gains by the NDP in a lot of ridings downtown.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like NDP on the one, so they've got basically a two-front war. They've got the NDP on the one hand challenging them in the city of Toronto ridings, and then the Conservatives in the Greater Toronto area surging right now.
Let's go west into the prairies. What are we seeing there?
Well, I don't have a board for the prairies, Michael, because it's so blue. Sorry, not to offend any of the listeners, but oh, yeah, okay, it's all blue except for a couple spots, and those couple spots are now, you know, so not a lot in the prairies. BC is a completely different story. So, you know, when we look at the province as a whole, you can see the Conservatives benefiting right now in the seat projections, with the NDP losing seats once we get out of the lower mainland. But let's zoom into Vancouver. Wow. Can we call it a dog's breakfast? I don't know if we want to call it a dog's breakfast, because I don't have a dog and I don't know what a dog's breakfast looks like. But, you know, you could see the last election, the Liberals doing really well in Vancouver, and also the New Democrats being a key force in Vancouver. But, you know, check out the numbers now. You can see Vancouver being another big battleground between the Liberals, the New Democrats, and the Conservatives. Right now, with the Conservatives picking up seats, but still a lot of close races in Vancouver. How's that for excitement, you know, when it comes to where things are panning out? But the bottom line is, if an election were held today, and an election is not being held today, but if it were held today, we're talking still about a Conservative majority government.
This is a huge advantage that the Conservatives have right now. And if you're the NDP and the Liberals looking at their governing deal, and you're the NDP, especially, let's say you're Jagmeet Singh, what do you do with this information?
Well, you know, I think if you're Jagmeet Singh, you have to figure out what else you can do as part of this parliamentary arrangement so that you can deliver on something. Like he did deliver on the dental care, but he needs something else. Before, in my opinion, he needs something else before he pulls the plug on the parliamentary arrangement. But, you know, those numbers, the numbers between the Liberals and the New Democrats, if they start to close, I would expect there might be more of an appetite for the New Democrats to pull out of the parliamentary arrangement. And because they're not going to pull out and call an election, they're going to pull out and then, you know, a number of months afterwards, perhaps provoke an election. So a bit of a careful line to walk for Jagmeet Singh to try to get something out of the Liberals, but not be too cozy, because Liberal brand isn't really strong right now.
Nick, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll look at some surveys on potential strains in U.S. Canada relations. Nick, you have a couple new surveys you've done for CTV News that look at potential strains on U.S.-Canada relations. One looks at the impact of a return to the White House by Donald Trump.
The reality is that Donald Trump can win the presidential election. The election that he lost, he barely lost, right? It was just literally almost a handful of votes out of the millions of votes cast that put Joe Biden into the White House. And so I think we have to deal with this as something that could potentially happen. What's interesting is that when we ask about the impact that Trump would have, positive or negative, on Canada-US relations, Canadians overwhelmingly believe that it'll be worse. It's like 58% worse, and another 17% somewhat worse. Only about 10% think that it'll be better or somewhat better. So I think what Canadians should be prepared for is that, Donald Trump, and you know what? He's president of the United States. That's his primary, I shouldn't say he is president of the United States. He may be president of the United States. And if he was, his primary job responsibility, like Joe Biden's, is to the United States. It's not to Canada. And what we found is that, or my experience is that, whenever US politicians, Democratic or Republican, focus on the domestic agenda, usually Canada doesn't benefit from that because they make decisions based on the domestic political situation. So I think the reality is if you ask average Canadians, especially women, they're more likely to think that Trump would make things worse on the Canada-US file.
As you just said, Nick, when both Democratic and Republican presidents have been more protectionist in terms of trade with Canada, it sort of crosses the political divide in the U.S. It's not necessarily a Trump thing, although NAFTA is up for renew in, I believe, 2025, 2026, which could be a major headache for the Canadian government then.
Who would have thought? No, but who would have thought on the renewal of the Canada-US Mexico trade agreement, that they had that clause like 6 years, the 6-year renewal. I don't think anybody thought that Donald Trump would even potentially be the president again, but he could be the president at the time of the renewal if he wins the election. The election he has the advantage in the polls, but it's still too close to call, and there's a lot of stuff that can happen. But I don't think anybody really foresaw that at all.
No. Nick, you've got a second one also about, Republicans have been calling for tougher security measures at the U.S.-Canada border. And you did another survey on how Canadians feel they might be impacted by that.
Yeah. We just basically asked, whether Canadians were concerned or not concerned about the U.S. increasing security measures at the border. And about 46% had one level of concern to one extent or another. About 52 were not concerned to one extent or another. So a bit of a division, but still a significant proportion are worried about the U.S. increasing security measures at the border, especially higher if you were women or over 55 years of age. You are much more likely to be to worry about something like that. So, we are a border country. 90% of Canadians live within a 1-hour drive of the border. So we are border junkies. I don't know. We have a border fixation, whatever. I don't want to get too kinky into it. But anyways, the border is important to Canada, and we're very sensitive to any changes. Many times in the past, those changes have not really been directed at Canada. They've been directed at Mexico, and Canada has had the fallout from a decision made on the U.S. border because of the Mexicans. And then there was like, the Americans are like, yeah, that wasn't really directed at you. Sorry. But they don't do anything, right? So it is what it is.
What's your big takeaway from these two surveys?
Uncertainty. Canadians are worried and they're focused on the U.S. election. Right now we don't know what will happen in terms of trade, regardless of who the winner is in the next election. So they're thinking about trade and the border.
Nick, I think that's all we have time for this episode. As always, thank you very much.
Take it easy.